Today is the holiday of Rosh Chodesh. And so it's an auspicious time because Rosh Chodesh, as we mentioned many times, is a holiday that's designated for the Jewish woman. Because of the Jewish woman's reluctance to participate in the Golden Calf. Rosh Chodesh Shvat, I'll just say a couple of things about Rosh Chodesh Shvat and about the month of Shvat, because it's by divine providence that we're having a Torah class as we welcome the month of Shvat. So the month of Shvat is known, obviously, mostly for Tu B'Shvat, the 15th day of the month of Shvat. The month of Shvat also in the Chabad calendar is a very auspicious day because on the 10th of Shvat is the day that the Lubavitcher Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson took upon himself the leadership. He reluctantly accepted the leadership of the Chabad movement on the 10th of Shvat. It is also the day of the yahrzeit of his father-in-law a year before. And so that's an important time for the Chabad community. But the Tu B'Shvat is a day that celebrates the trees. It's called Rosh Hashanah Li'lanot. It is the new year for trees. And trees represent life. And the Torah says about the trees, it says, Ki Adam H Hasadeh, that a man or a human is like the tree of the field, meaning that there are so many similarities between us and trees. And there are so many things that we can learn from the trees and where the trees can inform our lives on different things. The overarching concept of the New Year's of trees. What is the New Year of tree? So in the Talmud, it discusses when is the New Year for trees. And there's a difference of discussion, a difference of opinion. Some say the 1st of Shvat today. But the majority opinion was that it was the 15th of Shvat. What happens on the 15th of Shvat? So in the land of Israel, the sap of the tree begins to flow again. The tree becomes dormant during the winter, and the sap of the tree starts to flow, and it is the genesis of spring. So while people have, Groundhog Day to know when spring is coming, we have Tu B'Shvat to know that this is the beginning of spring. And the reason why we have Tu B'Shvat and how is Tu B'Shvat part of Jewish tradition is that in temple times, people had to bring different gifts that came from the tree. They had to bring the trumot, the gifts that came from the trees were the gifts that they had to give to the Kohen. There was the arla, the first fruits of the tree. So the decision on from when the tree was considered to be having fruit or responsible for giving the fruit starts from Tu B'Shvat. And so we have this idea of this is like the hallmark, this is the new year for the trees. Also on Tu B'Shvat, we celebrate the fruits of the land of Israel. The Torah says about the land of Israel that it is Eretz Chita, Usaora, V'Gefen, Te'ena, V'Rimon, Eretz Zayis, Shem, and Advash. It is a land that is filled with wheat and barley and pomegranates and grapes and olives and the sweet honey of the sweet honey of the palm and the date and figs. So the Rosh Hashanah celebrates these things. So these are things that, again, fruits and vegetation beget sweetness, hope, and the pulse of life. So even though we are in the dead of winter, and in a way we could say we haven't even yet reached the dead of winter, we're only in January. Nevertheless, the fact that we already start to celebrate the month of Shvat means that we are headed towards the summer. And indeed, we made the shift from the days becoming ever so short and shorter to the days starting to become a little bit longer. So today is a day to celebrate. Today is Rosh Chodesh Shvat. Today is a holiday for Jewish women. Today is the month that celebrates the beginning of the counting of the new fruits and the new trees. And so it is a day that reminds us that we always live with hope in the Jewish tradition, and we always live with renewal. And no matter where we find ourselves, in which situation we find ourselves, there is something that can be gleaned that is that is positive and moving. And in the signs for the month of Shvat, so the signs of the month of Shvat is the Aquarius in English, but the pale bearer, or the pale, the Dali in Hebrew, which again symbolizes the copious amount of precipitation that happens during the month. And we've been experiencing that in Montreal, a lot of cloud and a lot of snow. There's a copious amount of precipitation, but after the copious precipitation, we know that in the Jewish tradition, precipitation and rain, when it falls in its right time, and winter is its right time, it is a sign of blessing and is a sign of God's countenance shining upon us. So happy Rosh Chodesh Shvat to us all. Today we're supposed to do something special for ourselves and not do too much work in the house. Of course, if we have a pile of dishes waiting for us, we have no choice. But to the extent that we can defer heavy housework from today to another day, we should. So happy Rosh Chodesh. And with that, we will go into the Torah portion of Bo. So the Torah portion of Bo is I would say it's the trilogy in a certain way of the story of Pharaoh and his confrontation with Moses. So we know that we have the beginning of the book of Shemot, called in English, Exodus. The book of Exodus, we have Shemot, Va'era, and Bo. The first three sections of the Torah are Shemot, Va'era, and Bo. In Shemot, in the first portion, we meet the players. We meet the situation. The players are Pharaoh. And the situation is the enslavement of the Jewish people. And then we go on to meet Moses and the plagues and the beginning of the confrontation with Pharaoh. So we have altogether 10 plagues, very famously: Dam, Tzfardea, Kinim, Arov, Dever, Shchin, Bared, Arba, Choshech, Makas Bacharos. So Dam, Tzfardea, Dam is blood, Tzfardea is frogs, Kinim is lice, Dever is an affliction for animals, Bared is the hail, Shchin is a form of boils, Dam, Tzfardea, Kinim, Arov, Dever, Shchin, Bared, Arba is the locust, and Choshech is the darkness, and Makas Bacharos is the slaying of the firstborn. So we already, by now, even though we haven't discussed it here in this class, the Torah already recounts 7 of the plagues. And we know famously that Moses comes to the palace of Pharaoh, and he meets him at the Nile, and he says, "Let my people go." And Pharaoh does not want to let his people go. And so God brings a plague, and then Pharaoh relents a little bit, and then another plague, and then Pharaoh relents, and his heart gets hardened, and so on and so forth. This is kind of tit for tat, back and forth, until we find ourselves here in the Torah portion of Bo. And in the Torah portion of Bo, we meet the encounter of the last 3 plagues. Now, the name of the Torah portion, Bo, is an interesting name, and we're going to get into the name of the Torah portion. The name of the Torah portion is Bo, which in Hebrew means, anyone? You can unmute yourself. Anyone?
Bo is come.
Come. So if you wanted, yes, come. If you wanted to tell someone to go somewhere, right? If you would want to tell someone in Hebrew, go to this person, go visit this person, you would say what?
Lech levaker.
Lech. Okay. You would go lech. Like God told Abraham, lech lecha, go. When you tell someone to go somewhere, the proper language that is normatively used is go. And
is it because Hashem wanted to go with me, like go with me together?
Yes.
Hashem and Moshe?
Yes. Yeah? Yes, exactly. Usually the normative word would be go, lech. Here, what is Moshe being told? Bo el paro. And when do you say to someone, come? come to me. Come over. Well, now we're not allowed to say that. Come over, come visit. Meaning I am here and you will come to where I am. So it's an invitation to join me where I'm at. When Moses is told by God, Bo el Paro, come to Paro, it almost sounds like God is where?
With
With
Pharaoh.
God is
With
with Paro. He's like,
Yeah.
Bo el Paro, come to Paro. Come to Paro.
God is
So-
busy hardening. God is busy hardening Pharaoh's heart. So
He is
with
busy.
Pharaoh.
He is busy hardening Pharaoh's heart. But what is this idea of come to Pharaoh? So, in a there's different understandings of the way we interpret Torah. But from a mystical perspective, it touches on a very deep idea. And what's this idea? This deep idea is that Moses at this point was afraid to go to Pharaoh. He was afraid to go. And so God is telling him, come with me. I will be there with you. Yeah. But the question is, why was
But
Moses
it
so
definitely is
down?
slower than it was. I don't know how fast it does come down, but it's coming down.
Yes, sir. Okay, so this is one question that we have hanging on this week's Torah portion. This idea of come to Pharaoh. What is Moses afraid of? So we're going to get into that in a minute. The other thing is, and this is what we're going to take a different perspective on the whole story with Pharaoh. The story that we always look at is, Pharaoh is this evil ruler, doesn't let the Jewish people go. And you have Moses, the faithful shepherd of the Jewish people, who confronts Pharaoh and demands that he should let the people go. And eventually, Pharaoh does let the Jewish people go. That is how we have the story. Now, today what we're going to do is we're going to look at the Torah portion, but I'm going to ask you to look at the Torah portion not from the perspective of us, a Jewish person, or from the perspective of Moses, but rather to look at the Torah portion from the perspective of who?
Pharaoh.
Of Pharaoh. Okay, so I'm going to I'm just going to find the Torah portion. I'm just going to pull it over here because where are we? Is this a Torah reading? Yeah. All right, so let me just pull up the Torah portion here from the screen. Okay, and here we go. So we have here the Torah portion of Bo. You see, we have Parshat Bo, and we are here at the Torah portion of Bo. So God says to Moses, right, the very famous words, Bo el Para, come to Para, and this is why this week's Torah portion is called Parshat Bo, based on these words. And he says, come to Paro, ki ani ichbadati et libo ve'eslev avadav. I have made his heart hard, and I have also done so to the heart of his servants. Leman shisi isasai ela bekirbi, so that I can place my signs in his midst. In other words, I'm going to do a shock and awe campaign. We're gonna get into the excitement. We're having this back and forth. We're getting into the excitement. You're going to see now great things. And God continues and he tells Moses, and I'm going to do this now for you. So this is something that is going to be part and parcel of the Jewish tradition forevermore. Whatever I'm going to do now is going to be so that one day you will tell your children and your children's children all the signs that I have put in front of Pharaoh and all the great miracles that I have made. And so with this encouraging words, we see that Moses and Aaron come to Pharaoh and they say to Pharaoh in more bold words, Kayemar Hashem Elokeha Ivrim, so says God, the God of the Hebrews, Ad Masai le'anais mefanai shalach ami ve'avduni. How long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Send my people so they shall worship me. Okay, you have how long are you going to hold on to this? Send my people so that they shall worship you. And I want you just to take note that of the language that Moses and Aaron are using vis-a-vis Pharaoh, and the language is ad masai ma'anta la'anais, until when or how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me, which is very key to our discussion today. So what is the challenge that Moses posits before Pharaoh? His challenge is, Pharaoh, how long will you stop from humbling yourself before me? In other words, how long will you maintain your arrogance? And he says, Ki im ma'ein ata l'shalech es ami, hineni maybe machar arba b'volecha, because if you do not let my people go, I am going to send locusts in your borders, and guess what? The locusts are going to be all over. You will not be able to see the earth, and anything that's left in terms of vegetation in Egypt is going to be completely consumed. Your houses and all of your servants and everything will be filled. You are going to be so messed up with this locust. You're not going to see the earth. There would never have been such an infestation of locusts like you're going to see if you don't let my people go. And so what happens? He goes and he throws down the gauntlet, Moses does, and he says, okay, Pharaoh, I'm out of here. What do you say? And at this point, the servants of Pharaoh turn to him and say to Pharaoh, how long can this be a stumbling block? Let these people go worship God. Let them go worship through God. Don't you know that if you don't hurry up, before you know it, Egypt is going to be lost? So Moses leaves. He throws this, gauntlet at Pharaoh, and he closes the door behind him, and the servants erupt. The servants are saying to Pharaoh, stop it already. You're destroying all of us. Let those people go worship their God. This stubbornness is taking a huge toll. And so Vayushav as Moshe as Aaron, they have Moses and Aaron return to Pharaoh. They call them back. They said, okay, go serve your God. Who's going? Who are going? Okay, give us a list so we can issue visas, as it were. What does Moses say? And by the way, this statement of Moses becomes something that I have heard over many years, repeated by the Lubavitcher Rebbe an untold number of times. Moses says as follows: who's going? I'll tell you who's going. Binarenu, with our youth, uviskinenu, and with our elders, Nelech. Vivanenu, with our sons, uvivnaisenu, and with our daughters. Vitzainenu, with our sheep, uvivkranenu, and with our flocks, Nelech kikag Hashem lanu, because it is a holiday for God. So Moses says, you know who's coming? Everyone's coming. Our old and our young, our babies, our girls and our boys, everyone's coming. And he says, Pharaoh says rather facetiously, he says to them, Kain, Hashem imcha, God must surely be with you. Kasher shalach estem estapchem, because if I send you and your babies, you should just know something, Moses. Ru'u kira neged pnechem. Look at the evil that is going to befall you. So we're having this conversation. Moses is asked who's coming. He said everyone. I mean everyone. I mean even our babies, our small and our young and our old, our elders and our children. Everyone is coming. And what does Pharaoh say to him? Hey Moses, I hope you're okay. I hope your God is really with you, because you know what? You want to take your babies into the desert? Are you crazy? Ru'u kira neged pnechem. Look, there's evil awaiting you. There's evil awaiting you in the desert. And so he says to him, come on, let's be reasonable. Lie. No, this is not a good idea. This is not a good idea to have children and babies and newborns going into a desert, into a no man's land, out of civilization. This is ridiculous and dangerous and irresponsible. So Pharaoh says to him, no, you're not. Lo chein lechu. This is not the way you should go. Hakibarim, the men should go. The dudes should go. The ivdu es Hashem, let the men go, the young men. The ivdu es Hashem, and they will serve God. Kiatim mivakshim, because okay, you want to serve God. And Moses says, no, it's not just our men, it's all of us. And they chased him out before Pharaoh. So what happens here? What is this confrontation between Moses and Pharaoh? Pharaoh says, okay, Moses, you could take but who's coming? And he's like, oh, everyone's coming, everyone, even our small children, even our young ones, everyone is coming. We're all in this together. And Pharaoh says, sorry, Moses, but you're being irresponsible. And he says, Ru'u ra neged pnechem, that there's evil. And Rashi says that the evil that he's talking about is that the astrologers of Pharaoh saw through their divination that there is a star called Ra, and this star is a star that brings destruction and blood. And they saw a lot of blood, a lot of bloodshed happening in the future for the Jewish people. And so he said, I don't think it's a good idea, Pharaoh. I think this is, Pharaoh says, I don't think it's a good idea. You're doing something very dangerous. Okay, you're doing something just horrible and irresponsible. And I'm just going to share the Rashi with you very quickly here. Rashi here on the words Ru'u kira neged pnechem. You see that evil is before you. So Rashi says that he brings down an agadic medrash. He says that there's a star named Ra. Ra means evil in Hebrew. And Pharaoh said to them, to Moses and Aaron, with my astrology, I see that star is sending toward you the desert, where you would like to go, and that this is a sign of blood and slaughter. So he's seeing something negative happening to the Jewish people, and he says it's dangerous. Now, the Torah tells us, Rashi continues, that perhaps he saw what happened to the Jewish people when, in the desert. And in fact, the Medrash says that there is a saying that when God wanted to kill the Jewish people after their sin of the golden calf, Moses confronted God and he said, Lama yemru ha-Mitzrayim, why should the Egyptians say that God took them out with evil? A double entendre, evil meaning, why did God take them out for evil? Also, God, why did God allow evil, this bad force, to hurt them? So here the Medrash says that actually the blood that they saw was, I guess, rectified through the blood of the Brit Milah, and so they got confused with the blood and the blood. But let's not go into that Medrash too deeply. Let's go more for the pshat. Look at it from Pharaoh's perspective. Okay, he has a people. He has a slave people, and he's their government, and they want to go and they want to worship some kind of god that he doesn't really get. All right, you want to worship your god? You're weird. But you know what? The signs that I'm getting and all the destruction in Egypt, it's costing too much. Okay, all right, well, we'll deal. We'll let you go. But who's going? And Moses says, everyone. And by the way, parenthetically, I mentioned this before, that this is one of the verses that the Lubavitch Rebbe would repeat very, very often, that with our young and with our old, with our girls and with our boys. He would say that when the Mashiach will come, it will be an all-encompassing redemption. But it bespeaks also, just as an aside, it bespeaks a very foundational principle of Torah, which is that in our tradition, in our religion, in the Torah life, it's not some people that have to go worship God. Yes, to be sure, there are some people that have more responsibilities in prayer. Let's say men have more responsibilities with organized prayer, a minyan 3 times a day, and so on and so forth. But the revelatory part of the religion, in other words, the connected part of the religion, the part where we engage Shabbat and kosher and everything that we observe as Jews, is something that is meaningful and important and vital for everyone, whether a person is a senior citizen or a little child. And so we find that when we do get together, let's say on holidays like Shavuot, the Rebbe would stress that even little newborn babies should be brought to shul to hear the reading of the 10 Commandments. And even someone who was already feeling that, it's not for me anymore. This is past my time. I'm already retired. It's not for me. Let the young ones go. No, it's for everyone. Judaism is relevant to every single person from birth until the last breath is breathed. So this is also, when Moses is making the statement, he's underlying foundational truth of Judaism, an axiomatic truth about Judaism, which is that every single person is important to God. Even a little baby's connection to God is important. And so we find that we start teaching our children about Torah from a very young age. As soon as they can speak, we teach them the Shema, we teach them the Moda'ani, we teach them the Aleph base, and we continue that tradition, until 120. One of the great initiatives that the Rebbe started was the idea of Tiferes Levi Yitzchak, that there should be, for people who were already retired and felt, okay, it's past me, that they should actually start, going back to school for retired people, so that even at that age, you have so much to learn and you have so much to accomplish, and you also have so much to give. So the Torah is an all-encompassing tradition that every single part of our family is needed, from young until old. But from Pharaoh's perspective, and remember I told you we're going to look at this from the lens of Pharaoh. From Pharaoh's perspective, he is the government, and these people want to take the Jews out into the desert, and he's like, well, that's not responsible. You don't take babies into a desert. You don't take older people into a desert. Take the young, healthy guys and let them do this journey. Fine with me. Go do your journey, serve your God, and come back. But the children, you're going to drag children into a desert. The desert is very cold at night, and it's very hot during the day. There's no vegetation. It's irresponsible. I'm gonna call Child Protective Services on you. This is ridiculous. You can't do this, right? You can't just drag kids into a desert. What is this, like Jonestown? Are you a bunch of people going to worship your God somewhere out in the boondocks? You don't do this. So I found this like perspective very interesting. Rabbi Din Steinsaltz says that although we would like to align ourselves with Moses, in the sense that Moses is our leader, Moses represents the Jewish people, Moses represents the struggle of the Jewish people. He says, in fact, if you look at it, Moses is someone who talks to God. Moses is unchanging. If you look at Moses comes to Pharaoh over and over and over again. Moses is stable. He keeps to his word. He talks about what is needed. He communicates with God. Pharaoh is all over the place. He says, okay, you could go. No, changes his mind. He gets happy, he gets sad, he gets angry. Even at one point, not in this week's Torah portion, but in the previous Torah portion, at one point, he seems to do tshuva. In the previous Torah portion, when God is bringing one of the plagues, let me see if I can find that, if I can pull that up here. Yeah, here it is. Okay, so in the previous Torah portion, in the Torah portion of Vayera, when one of the plagues are being brought out, you see that he says, Pharaoh says something so interesting. Vayishlach para vayikra l'Moshe v'Aaron. Pharaoh called to Moses and to Aaron, vayomer aleihem, and he said to them, Chatasi hapa'am, this time I have sinned. Hashem hatzadik, God is the righteous one. God is the correct one. Va'ani va'ami harishayim, and me and my people are the guilty ones. We are the evil ones. So you see that even before here, there was this kind of tit for tat, this kind of conversation that keeps coming back and forth. You see that there's interesting words coming out of Pharaoh's mouth. Chatasi, I have sinned. Hapam, this time I've made a mistake. Hashem hatzadik, God is righteous. Vani va'ami harashayim, and me and my people are the guilty ones or the evil ones. What's going on here? So I saw this beautiful teaching for Rabbi Steinsaltz, and he says, actually, if you look at Pharaoh, the behavior of Pharaoh is not, take away from some of his extreme behaviors. So Pharaoh is a problem in the extreme, okay? Because we know he enslaved the people, he threw little babies into the Nile, and that is certainly not a personality that resonates with us or that we can even wrap our minds around. He just embodies evil, which he does, which he is. But Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz says this interesting idea. He said, if you look at Pharaoh, you're going to see that take away some of the extreme elements of his egregious behavior, a lot of his argumentation is reasonable. What are you doing, Moses? You're taking a people into a dangerous desert to serve a God, and he's basically telling them, you're going to have trouble. You're going to have. You think it's better out there? You're going to have trouble. And as the leader of this country, I can't just sit there and allow you to do this. So that Pharaoh represents, yes, on one side, the extreme evil that we know, King Pharaoh, let my people go. But also Pharaoh represents a certain kind of a banal evil, a regular evil, an evil that we may find within ourselves, or even a rationalization that we may find within ourselves. So he says there that essentially when we look at Pharaoh, we see that Pharaoh, and this is also interesting, and I've seen this, many commentators talk about this, is that two things that we see. Number one, by and large, Moses addresses Pharaoh with a certain modicum of respect. That's number one. Number two, the Torah goes into great detail recording the conversation between Moses and Pharaoh. And the question is why? Why does Moses go into great detail to record the conversation? And the answer is because there's something that we can learn about ourselves in that conversation. In other words, well, we all have a Moses in us. We all have the good side. We all have the side of us that is the side of truth and the side that seeks truth and goodness. There's also the side that rationalizes away our negative behavior. And what was Pharaoh's overarching mistake? What was Pharaoh's overarching sin? So we're told that Pharaoh saw himself as a god. He was full of himself. From the time that he was a young boy, he grew up a child of a pharaoh. He was from the ruling class. He had all these serfs and the servants. He had his slaves. He believed himself as being actually the God. And we're told in Yechezkel, in Ezekiel, Ezekiel says that he's told, go says God to Pharaoh, because Pharaoh talks about himself. What does Pharaoh say about himself? He says about himself, Li Yaori Vani Asisini. The river is mine and I made myself. In other words, I am a God figure. I am a Godhead. And so Pharaoh sees himself as a sort of like God, a Godhead. And so that is his mistake. And so when Moses comes to him, the exercise that Moses has to have with Pharaoh, this whole interaction, is to tell Pharaoh, you're not the God. You think you're a God. Disabuse yourself of this notion. You're a ruler of a people, but you are not a God. There is one God, the creator of the heaven and earth. And this is why Moses says in this Torah portion, humble yourself. When are you going to humble yourself? When are you going to recognize this? So the fact that the Torah gives us so much information about the conversations between Moses and Pharaoh it is there to teach us something not only about Pharaoh, but also something about ourselves. What stops us? What stops us from recognizing God, as it were? What stops us from making or continuing in a certain path of behavior? It's a lack of self-awareness. It's a lack of introspection, a lack of self-criticism, the inability to look at ourselves and say, maybe I am not God, so to speak. I am not right in this situation. And that's human nature. Human nature, Pharaoh is the expression of human nature gone bad, but it's human nature. And so we have this idea that a person, even a person can do tshuva, a person can try to do good and rectify their wrongdoing, and even say, like Pharaoh says after one of the plagues, God is righteous, me and my people, we are the ones who have sinned. I see that God is righteous. So he says this time, oh yeah, God, I got it. I made a mistake. God is righteous. So the question is, okay, so once he made that declaration, which is not in this week's Torah portion, but in the previous Torah portion, so the question is then, so when Pharaoh makes this declaration, you know what? Yeah, okay, sorry, God, you're right. I made a mistake. You're right. I'm wrong. My people have made a mistake. I see this time that you have made a mistake. So after he makes that announcement, why doesn't he let the Jewish people go then? I mean, he acknowledges it at that point. He sees it at that point. So why doesn't he let the Jewish people go then? So what happens to him? He becomes stubborn. But what causes his stubbornness? Anyone? Pipe in, unmute yourself.
God hardened his heart.
Yes, so we'll get into that. God hardened his heart, but Maimonides says that God hardened Pharaoh's heart because he had already sinned with his heart. In other words, first Pharaoh hardened his heart by himself. The first 5 plagues, Pharaoh hardened his own heart. And then later on, God hardened his heart. So the hardening of the heart was actually a retribution, according to Maimonides. It was a retribution for not having exercised his free will when he could have. In other words, he hardened his heart when he had full capacity not to. And so when he, so as a retribution, this happens. But even then, the commentators say that God made it harder for him to recognize the problem, but still there was an element of free will. In fact, I saw a very interesting commentator from the Sforno, Rabbi Vadia Sforno. He says as follows, so interesting, that God hardened Pharaoh's heart because Pharaoh was beset by all these plagues, right? The lightning and the thunder and the blood and the frogs and the lice and the dead animals. So what happens is, in such a situation, when you have a shock and awe campaign, like God beset on Egypt, invariably what happens in such a situation when you have an overarching and a overwhelming display of God's strength, of God's righteousness. Ultimately, what happens in such a situation?
You don't want to give up. You want to show that you are better than God or strength.
Yes, that's Pharaoh. But in a normal
that's Pharaoh.
situation, you know, like so many of us say, one of the great complaints I think that the Jewish people have is, God, where were you all these years, right? Where were you when we needed you, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, people say, look, if God revealed himself to me, if I saw the miracles that the Jewish people had in the Exodus, I also would have believed in God. But here I live in a world where the righteous, good people suffer and evil people prosper. So I don't see overt strength coming against those who are bad, and I don't see blessing coming to those who are good. So it's very, very difficult. And then we have complete free choice because the environment is so not conducive to recognizing God that whichever choice we make, we truly are making this choice.
Well, most people would have responded to this shock and awe with belief in God,
That's
like
right.
we did at Sinai.
That's right. Most people would respond to a shock and awe in an openness. And the truth is, imagine we lived in a world where someone did something very evil, and then the next day they were struck down by lightning. And when someone did something very charitable, they won the lottery. With time, what would happen to us? We would lose our free choice. We would start doing things because we knew, I'm going to give charity because, you know, people who give charity win lotteries, and I'm not going to do evil because, you know, people who do evil get killed in car accidents or struck by lightning. So with time, what happens is that we lose our free choice. So very interesting interpretation from Rabbi Avadia Sforno. He says, no, his commentary is known as the Sforno. He says, actually, what God was doing when he made Pharaoh's heart was he was like resetting Pharaoh. In other words, because there was such an overt display of judgment for those who had done evil and protection for the Jewish people, it was like Pharaoh was starting to lose his free choice. So the Sforno says that actually God was trying to recalibrate the playing field so that Pharaoh would have free choice again, because his heart was being crushed by what was happening to him. So a different take altogether.
I love your word, Dvorah. You said calibrate.
Yes.
The thing that really strikes me in this thing that you're bringing out into the open, the push and pull, is that these people are slaves. They are under a yoke, like a cow is under the yoke. They have no freedom of choice. So in a way, God is trying to shake the dust from under the carpet, under their feet, so that they come to realize that their energy has been depleted. They have no energy. It doesn't belong to them. It belongs to this anti-God. And so how can God convince them that they are going to follow this madman into the desert with their frail elderly and their children into the cold? There was no other way for God to get them to collaborate, but to, it's like a candy you give to a child. He says no, and then you say, okay, I'll take it back. So he wants it back. And I see that as the dynamic. He had no choice. God had no choice but to do.
Sandra, what you're saying is actually quite brilliant and very intuitive in terms of what the commentators talk about in terms of what had to happen to the Jewish people. Indeed, we're told that when it came down to it, the Jewish people were at the abyss, really at the abyss of all human experience. They were, the Torah tells us, spiritually and of course morally, psychologically, of course, they were completely shattered. But even spiritually speaking, when you are subjugated for such a long time and you start to serve for such a long time, a Pharaoh that is all ego and all cruelty and all full of himself, invariably you will be affected by it. So the Torah tells us, and our rabbis tell us, that there's 50 levels. There's 50 levels of impurity that exist in this world. 50 gates of impurity is a lack of life, a lack of holiness, and opaqueness. And so there's this 50 levels of opaqueness that a person can have on their soul. And the Jewish people were at the 49th level. And it was like, if they wouldn't have been taken out, then they would never have been able to actually be extricated from that situation. So they were at the abyss of abyss. There was an opaqueness around their hearts. And God did have to kind of break the mold. And the truth is, what God did when he took the Jewish people out was he broke the mold. He took the Jewish people out of Egypt, and then he had to make a new mold, which is, you are my people. Because true freedom is not being random. And there's a beautiful interpretation, actually, about this idea that when God told Moses, Bo el Paro, come into Paro, come with me to Pharaoh, what was Moses so reluctant to do? Why was Moses so reluctant to go into Pharaoh? So there's a teaching from the Zohar. So this is a kind of a very mystical teaching, that there's a teaching from the Zohar that says that Moses was reluctant to come to Pharaoh because he saw in Pharaoh certain negativity that he didn't want to touch. He didn't, it's like, he didn't want to deal with him anymore. It was like, he felt maybe that he was like, so what was it that he was afraid of? So there's different interpretations, and they all kind of talk about the same idea. One of them is that Moses was afraid of Pharaoh, and God took him, he brought him into Pharaoh, and he said, look at Pharaoh, he's nothing. There's nothing there, it's just ego. Don't be afraid, it's just ego, and I'm going to shatter this ego. There's nothing more. And by the way, we see a lot of times with tyrants, they're megalomaniacs, they're crazy people, they need to have their poster put on, you see in certain dictator countries, they need to have their poster like plastered everywhere, their painting, their likeness, their statues. They just need to see themselves everywhere. Everyone has to salute to them. There's a consumption with self, and this consumption with self doesn't allow them to look inside of themselves. How do dictators become so evil? It's because they become so engulfed with themselves that they cannot see, they can't introspect, they can't see suddenly that they're doing things that are wrong. So Moses was being told by God, come with me, come look and see what is this big boogie monster?
Yeah,
come see behind.
He's also vulnerable.
Yes, go see behind the Wizard of Oz. There's nothing there. It's just a scared puppy pretending to be. So this is one of the ideas. Another idea that the Zohar brings out, which is a little bit more esoteric, is the idea that Moses saw something very powerful in Pharaoh that he was afraid of, was a kind of an evil. And what was it? So the Zohar says it was a Tanin. He saw the image of a Tanin. What's a Tanin? A Tanin is a sea monster. And like Moses intuited, like he saw Pharaoh as a sea monster, and God wanted Moses, this is according to the Zohar, again, it's a deep idea. What's a sea monster? A sea monster reigns with impunity, reigns with freedom. First of all, a fish in of itself is the creature that just goes wherever it wants. There's a certain freedom in a fish. So like an expression, like a creative expression, like I'm here, I'm there. And the sea monster is like the extrapolation to the maximum of that idea. And so the Zohar says that Moses was afraid of this creative power or this freedom, what the Zohar calls his spashtus, like this complete, like just like I spread myself everywhere. This kind of, this kind of like just free will, chaos almost. Okay, and it was like it's a chaos that comes from a lot of energy. And God told Moses, before we leave Egypt, you're going to go into Pharaoh and you're going to hijack this chaos. You're going to hijack this freedom and you're going to hijack it and you're going to bring it back. And you're going to bring it back to the Jewish people and you're going to put it inside the law. You're going to bring it into the law. You're going to bring it into the life of a Jew so that when a Jew lives a life of law, it's not a life of obeisance and a life of mindless involvement, but rather it's something that within the context of keeping the law, there's also a lot of vibrancy and joy and passion. So what the Zohar says is what God was doing was kind of stealing the little good thing with Pharaoh, which taken to its extreme is chaos and murder and megalomania. But
if you will, I'm sorry to
Sure.
interrupt, but it struck me as you spoke, God was massaging their spiritual muscles.
yes, God was massaging this and also like taking it out, like trying to extricate. And what does that teach us? What does it teach us that this is what the Zohar is teaching us, that Moses was afraid to go to Pharaoh and God said, we're going to extricate this from Pharaoh. Or that the other teaching is that Moses was afraid of Pharaoh and God showed him, oh, don't worry, it's just ego. It's nothing Pharaoh. It's nothing Moses. It means that even in those people that are seemingly evil, there's a certain, their badness, even that badness extricated and cleaned up can be channeled to good. Now, there's something called the Shalosh Klippas Hatmeos. There are 3 elements in the world of evil that can never be fixed, okay? There are certain things that are beyond redemption. But the energies that power people often are found in a pharaoh and in a human being, in a regular human being. In other words, we're all a little bit of Moses, and we all have also a little bit of Pharaoh in us. So when we're confronting the Pharaoh of the story of Egypt, we also have to confront the Pharaoh in ourselves. And what's the Pharaoh in ourselves? So I saw this beautiful teaching of Rabbi Steinsaltz. He says that this is the idea of when we say, okay, God, you're right. And we have a momentary tshuva. We have a time where we say, yeah, you're right. And then the next day, what do? Our rationalization start, the human nature takes over, and we convince ourselves that the bad thing that we're doing now, and I mean the bad, bad is a very big word. So it could be the lack of sensitivity to another person, the selfishness of an act, the self-importance, the need to be acknowledged. These are all pharaonic tendencies. So we don't want to be that. We apologize, but we go back and we do it again. And the Talmud says that when we do something over and over again, we just become used to it, and then it doesn't feel so bad. To quote Mark Twain said that the easiest thing, it's attributed to him. I don't know if he was actually the one who said it, but I've seen it attributed to him. He said that the easiest thing I ever did was stop to smoke. It's the easiest thing I've ever done, because I had to know. I've stopped 1,000 times. Some people say he said it about drinking. Some people say he said it about smoking. But for all of us human beings, trying to live a good life, a godly life, a righteous life, a life with sensitivity to others, we have to be aware of the Pharaoh within us. Because the Pharaoh within us is not the Pharaoh that, God forbid, does evil things. That part, like I said, there are 3 elements of cruelty and banality and evilness that can never be extricated. The Shalosh Klippas Hatmeos. So when we're talking about, God forbid, murder or sexual immorality, there's nothing positive that we can draw out of those things. But we're talking about just ego. We're talking about the inability to see our mistakes, the inability to forgive, the inability to let things go, the inability to do self-introspection. This is intrinsically human. And so we have this conversation with Pharaoh so that we can see that, do I have a Pharaoh inside of me? And the answer is we probably all do. It's called the Yetzer Hara. And the good news is that we also have a Moses inside of us. So it is we have this battle within us. It's the Pharaoh and the Moses, the Pharaoh and the Moses. And so Rabbi Didin Steinzal says that when we say our prayers, there's a prayer that we say, and by the way, this always bothered me. There's a prayer that we say, and I never found a good reason for it, okay? There's a prayer that we say on Yom Kippur, and we also say it as part of our tachnun, as part of our forgiveness, and we have a custom that we say this in the Shema, which is we say the Oshamnu prayer. You know, the Oshamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu, Dibarnu, Dofi, we have sinned, we have done such and such. And it says at the end, it says, forgive us, because it is not only we who have sinned, Aval anachnu va'avaseinu chatanu, but we and our fathers have sinned. And so from the time that I was a very young child until today, the last verse, Aval anachnu va'avaseinu chatanu, but we and our fathers have sinned, I always had a hard time to say it. And I'm like, what do you mean my fathers have sinned? I look at my parents and my grandparents and my great-grandparents as my role models. So, and who am I compared to them? So I always would kind of swallow that, like a whisper, because I never understood it. I never understood why, you know? And I saw this beautiful teaching. Why do we say about anachnu va'avaseinu chatanu? To understand that the sin that we have is not necessarily something that we have to, it's not a superficial problem, but it's something that may be ingrained in humanity itself. It's something that is so human. And we have to look at the root of the problem, like before just me having this problem or my forefathers having this problem. It's something that's so endemic to humanity. This is a human issue. And when we see that our sin is a lot deeper, then we don't just brush it away. We don't say, okay, I made a mistake. We say, hold on, this is a problem. This is a human problem. I don't want to be part of this problem. It's the first time I saw something that really allowed me to say this with a full heart. And so really the point of this interaction is to confront the Pharaoh within ourselves. That Pharaoh that kind of makes excuses for the things that we do and refuses to be open to fixing ourselves. That is Pharaoh, because it's driven by an ego. And when we banish that away, we see that there's nothing there. And we don't have to have that ego. And what is that ego? That ego is, I pretend that I created the river. I pretend that I am the God. And when Pharaoh recognized ultimately that he was not a God, but that God was the God, then he was able to let the Jewish people go. It's true. It took a shock and awe campaign to open himself up to that, because he was so filled with himself. Only something grand could rip into him. But even Pharaoh at one point was able to point and say, this is the God of, this is Ze Etzba Elohim, this is the finger of God. He himself was able to recognize that he was not God. And so that's our avodah, that's our work that we all have to have, is that do we act like are we little despots within our own lives, within our own self, within our own psyche, within our families, the despot of within how we talk to ourselves? We have to remove that. Remember that we may have a little Pharaoh in us, but we also have a Moses in us. And that Moses is a lot more powerful than the Pharaoh. We have to hold on to the Moses, and then we will do better with ourselves. Because
Deborah, you know, the whole time when we talk about this, the 10 plagues, right, every single line, the whole story, I always see Miriam in the background, because
absolutely,
like you said, this Pharaoh, he was brought up from infancy to believe he's God. So how on earth do you expect him to think he's not? But this Moses, she, like Rabbi Sack says, she had the enterprising spirit to go and make sure that he can spend some time with his own people when he's little, so that he'll remember who he is.
Yes. And so there's a Hasidic band called Eighth Day. I think I shared this once with you. And they have a song called Moses and Me. And the opening words of that song is, knock, knock, Pharaoh's at my door. Oh, he still comes around. He changed his name, but I can hear his sound. So this is something that is a truism to all of us, that there is a Pharaoh inside of us. Actually, let me just see if I can find this video.
Can I
Yes.
just ask a quick
Sure.
question?
Sure.
So would Pharaoh be likened to our animal soul, whereas
Yes.
Moshe
Yes.
would be a spiritual soul?
Yes,
And
precisely.
okay,
Yes, exactly that.
Devorah,
Yes.
also, why did he tell Pharaoh that he's only going to go for 3 days?
So this is a good question. Why did he kind of trick Pharaoh? It is possible that Moses knew that had he told Pharaoh, by the way, Pharaoh, we're never coming back, that within the realm of nature, Pharaoh could never allow that to happen. Now, Pharaoh knew when you're taking everything with you, when Moses says we're going to take our young ones, our babies, and not only our babies, but we're taking every last animal we own, we're taking all our cattle, we're taking all our sheep. That was a euphemism for we're not coming back. When you pack on a trip and you go somewhere, you take some of your valuables, but you don't pack your house in a moving truck when you're going for a 3-day trip. So it could be this was like a saving grace to Pharaoh to say, oh, I didn't know they're all leaving, not coming back. It was to give him maybe a window within the realm of his limitation to let the Jewish people go. But he knew, because you don't go to Florida with a moving truck that has every suitcase and your dining room table and your kitchen sink. That's when you move. You don't go for vacation. So Pharaoh knew, but it was not spoken. And why it wasn't spoken? One of the reasons our sages say was because Pharaoh had to come chase the Jewish people out on the sea and see God's revelation in full glory, more than he could even see in his home country. And there's a whole other explanation about what, and that we're going to discuss that when we get to the crossing of the Red Sea. What was accomplished by this chasing of the Jewish people? Something also, the splitting of the sea, besides the Exodus, plays very strongly into the story of the Jewish people, and it had to happen. And perhaps if Moses would have asked permission and gotten it, he never would have had to chase. And the chase had to happen. Something had to be revealed and cleaned up at the chase, at the splitting of the sea. So it was part of the plan and part of the rectification of the Jewish people and part of the rectification of Pharaoh himself as well. So
Thank you.
yeah, so there's definitely, and it gets more exciting. The Jewish people leave. I mean, it does get more exciting. I think that the splitting of the sea is something that, all of us want in our lives, a splitting of the sea. We all need a splitting of the sea, so we're going to get into the splitting of the sea next time, inshallah. That's the great parsha. It's the parsha of great joy. And I look forward to discussing it then. In the meantime, everyone, have a wonderful week. Chodesh Tov. It's a month of hope. Adar, Shvat, we're going towards the new year of the trees. And let's all remember, each and every one of us, to recognize the Pharaoh that talks to us and outwit the Pharaoh and pull out our Moses.
Devorah, I wanted
Yes.
to say that when I was examining every time that Pharaoh says, okay, I have sinned and
Great.
I'm going to let you go, and you think he's doing tshuva, but well, the test of tshuva is that you don't do it again when confronted with the same situation. So up until the end, it's fake tshuva, like until he dies. Like
Precisely. So precisely, and very well pointed out. The Alter Rebbe in the Tanya, he talks about this concept, this notion of Rasha v'tovlo, a bad person and it is good for him. So the Alter Rebbe interprets this differently than the plain meaning. And he said, what is Rasha v'tovlo? What is a bad person and it's good for him? It's a bad person that does tshuva and then sins again. So a lot of us actually fall into that category, hopefully less often than we should, that we do. But Rasha v'tovlo is the idea that we say sorry, and we sin again. It's also very human, even though it's the underbelly of humanness. It's not a humanness that we like to see, But you see this, for example, with people who are, God forbid, addicted to something. They sin, they go, no, no more, no more, no more, I'm never gonna do this again. They do it again. So it's a weakness of returning back to the sin, even though at the time when a person is doing tshuva, at that moment, they really do want to get rid of the sin. They do acknowledge God. So it's very possible that Pharaoh momentarily had a flash of inspiration and logic and said, okay, you're right, I'm out of here. But then he went back to being Pharaoh. So
Well,
the goal is for us to go back to being Moses, and not like the goal is to be more like Moses than Pharaoh. And that is one of the reasons why we have this protracted, dialogue that we're all privy to, that we study every single year. It is to go into those words and to see how it can affect our lives and how we can become strengthened in the struggles that we have within ourselves, within our families, in our workplace, within our connection to God, and find strength from those interactions and find wisdom from those interactions and help us navigate our own lives. And that is what we achieve when we study Torah. As I mentioned many, many times, the Talmud says, "Hafachba v'hafachba dekulaba," turn its pages, everything is in it. And it gives us so much for our everyday living. So thank you everyone for joining me. And I wish everyone a Shavua Tov and a Chodesh Tov, and all the blessings and all the strength that we need within ourselves and within our families to touch our Moses and to get rid of our Pharaoh. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.